Thank you, Kyle. Make sure you finish the module 3 up through the summative quiz 2 that's right after lesson 7. Okay, get that done before Friday, please. Are you talking the announcements, Kyle? Like the stuff on here about type present and all that? If you are, this is in the announcements. A PDF of this is in the announcements today. Then you keep working on it. Yep, that's going to stay a expectation until people reach it. If it stays an expectation for the whole year, so be it. Absolutely, Anya. Yeah, I got your plus you're good. If you want to start moving ahead, you can. If you want to go back and retake anything and try to raise your grade, you can. Or you go on Khan Academy, get that stuff raised up. Okay? You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Stan Muller. This is Crash Course. Hi, I'm Stan Muller. This is Crash Course, and today we begin our mini-series on intellectual property. Hey, isn't the entire concept of intellectual property illegitimate? I mean, how can we justify locking up the world's science and art so that corporations, publishing houses, and other gatekeepers can control what we know and what we think? Information wants to be free, man. Hey, me from the past. There's a Stan from the past. This is great. Anyway, I can tell by looking into your vacant and bloodshot eyes that you've been up all night downloading Chumbawamba records over a dial-up connection. I remember those days, and I remember you desperately trying to cling to any ethos that justified your rampant copyright infringement. That is, if you ever participated in such activities. And even if you had participated in said infringing activities, the statute of limitations is likely run out. I don't even know what LimeWire is. I like how this is getting started because Stan from the past raises some interesting points. There's a good chance that he and a lot of you watching this video might think about aspects of intellectual property as outdated and pretty much irrelevant. Maybe lots of you don't think of it at all. That line, information wants to be free, has been used to argue that current intellectual property laws are outdated, overbroad, and generally awful. The quotation is attributed to Stuart Brand, and he said this to a group of computer programmers in 1984. On the one hand, information wants to be expensive because it's so valuable. The right information in the right place just changes your life. On the other hand, information wants to be free because the cost of getting it out is getting lower and lower all the time. So you have these two fighting against each other. The full quote, which you hardly ever hear, actually spells out the major tension between intellectual property and technology quite well. And it did it more than 30 years ago, when the digital age was just beginning. As information technology becomes more and more pervasive and important in our day-to-day lives in the information society, information itself becomes exponentially more important and more valuable. Paradoxically, as our information technology improves, and as our computers and connections get better and faster, and sharing becomes easier, we're less able to control the copying and dissemination of this incredibly valuable information. The law of supply and demand pushes down the information's value. This tension is nothing new. Technology, especially in the context of copyright law, has always presented challenges. Socrates, in Plato's Phaedrus, bemoaned the advent of books, arguing that they will implant forgetfulness in human beings' souls. They will cease to exercise memory because they rely on that which is written, calling things to remembrance no longer from within themselves, but by means of external marks. One way that humans have attempted to deal with these new technologies with varying success is by passing laws. The scourge of the piano roll was contemplated in the 1909 Copyright Act, the photocopier in 1976, and the internet was covered in the 1998 Digital Millennium Copyright Act. But we're going to try to avoid the simplified intellectual property versus technology binary. The idea that we have to choose between devaluing the fruits of intellectual talent and labor or devaluing the revolutionary information sharing capacity of our networks is wrong-headed. The more interesting and more difficult question is how we can strike a balance, how we can incentivize and promote this revolution in the way we share information, while at the same time incentivizing and promoting the production of creative works and inventions by having respect for the human beings that actually created them. The difference between today's debates and those that took place 100 years ago is that intellectual property pervades our lives more and more every day. This is especially true for anyone viewing this video. I know that about 90% of you view Crash Course in a web browser, so consider the layers of IP in this very YouTube page. A lot of what you're looking at is covered by copyright. This video, for example, is covered as a motion picture work. The website itself is considered a literary work. The thought bubble, the theme song, and the video you watched right before this one all have copyright protection. The software that streams the video is also a literary work. The web browser you're using is most likely registered as a computer program, as is the operating system. Lest you Linux weirdos think that you don't have a copyright on your OS, you do. You're just not enforcing it. Even your comments could be covered by copyright. That haiku you just posted, who is this person? What happened to Mr. suing grandmothers? We watch those unskippable FBI messages warning us about the consequences of copyright infringement, or we complain about paying thousands of dollars per pill for medicine. We tend to encounter intellectual property law in places where we as users are basically being told no. And being told no over and over again is irritating, especially when these no's don't seem to make any sense. And they're really irritating when they come with threats of fines or imprisonment. So in this course, we're going to focus less on enforcement and the no's and more on the part of intellectual property that often says yes, sometimes, maybe, it is certain, or even ask again later. I'm speaking, of course, of the liquid-filled dye agitator containing a dye having raised indicia on the facets thereof, registered as patent US 3119621, which you might know as the Magic 8-Ball. Before we get too far, we should probably define intellectual property. This is going to get pretty abstract, so let's go to the thought bubble. The theoretical definition of intellectual property would begin by saying that it is non-physical property that stems from, is identified as, and whose value is based on an idea or some ideas. There has to be some element of novelty. The thing that we describe as intellectual property can't be commonplace or generally known in the society where it's created at the time that it becomes property. You can't claim that you invented the wheel or that you wrote Moby Dick. Even though the source material for all IP is social, the inputs are our education, our human interactions, and basically all the sensory data around us that we take in. The thing that we call IP is the product of us putting together all these social inputs into something that we're going to call the idea. Only the concrete, tangible, or physical embodiments of the idea are protected by intellectual property law. The idea has to be fixed into a form and location in which humans have access to it. That could be a novel, or a logo, or a liquid-filled dye agitator containing a dye having raised indicia on the facets thereof. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So, in its purest and best form, IP is the propertization of intellectual effort and talent. In its most corrupt and worst form, intellectual property can be and has been used by the propertied and powerful to protect concentrated markets and broken business models. At its very worst, it can be used as a censorship tool. Intellectual property differs somewhat from real property like cars or houses.
See, people that have been in this class all period and haven't started a lesson quiz yet. Let's go, guys.
Because it's limited in duration and scope. For example, copyrights last for the life of the author plus 70 years. Copyrighted works can be copied under the fair use exception for certain personal or publicly beneficial uses. Let's say a book reviewer quotes long passages of a novel, then pans the book. It's likely the author of the book wouldn't grant permission for this type of use. But we want to encourage informed public discourse, so there's a good chance it would be found to
We're gonna cover you in honey.
I'm a sticky boy.
And while he's collecting money with honey, I'm gonna show you how you can do the same. Honey is the free browser extension. When you check out online and see
found to be a fair use. Patent law has carved out a be a fair use. Patent law has carved out a limited experimental use exception that permits minimal use of a patent for amusement, to satisfy idle curiosity, or for strictly philosophical inquiry. Again, the patent owner probably wouldn't like this, but the law wants to encourage individual tinkering. Both these limitations exist to serve the primary objective of intellectual property. That's to promote the progress of science and useful arts by increasing our stock of knowledge. So in this series, we're going to focus on the three main branches of intellectual property: copyrights, patents, and trademarks. We won't have time to get into some of the lesser cousins of the family like trade secrets or the right of publicity, but all of these are included under the umbrella of intellectual property. So in the coming weeks, we're going to try to get at some of the nuts and bolts of what intellectual property is. Because like it or not, IP is only going to become more and more relevant as our lives become more and more digital. So regardless of what or how you feel about any aspect of IP, it's probably a good idea to have some basic knowledge of it. It doesn't matter if you're a consumer or a creator of protected content or both. Is understanding IP going to help you? You may rely on it. See you next week. Crash Course Intellectual Property is filmed in the Chad and Stacy Imigholt studio here in sunny Indianapolis, Indiana, and it's made with the help of all of these nice workers for hire. If you'd like to help us make Crash Course in a monetary way that doesn't imply any ownership in the final work, you can subscribe at Patreon, a voluntary subscription service where you can support Crash Course and help make it free for everyone forever. You can get great perks, but the greatest perk of all is the satisfaction of spreading knowledge, right? So thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Hi, I'm Stan Muller, this is Crash Course Intellectual Property, and today we're going to be talking about copyright law. As you might have guessed, the law of copyright relates to the right to copy. The copyright as it relates to copies of copyrightable works. You copy? Right, so the right to copy or reproduce copyright-protected works is only one of the exclusive rights granted by the law of copyright. We're also going to discuss what types of things can actually be copyrighted, what we call the subject matter. But first, let's talk a little bit about the history of copyright law in the United States. Why the United States? Not because the US is exceptional and not because I'm a cultural imperialist trying to erode the identity and fabric of foreign nations. Mostly it's just because we're making this video in the United States and copyright law is territorial. So in 1709, England passed the Statute of Anne, which is widely considered to be the first copyright law. The Statute of Anne was the first law to grant ownership rights to individual authors rather than to publishers or printers. Throughout the 18th century, several of the American colonies adopted copyright and copyright-like laws based on the Statute of Anne. The drafters of the U.S. Constitution inserted what is commonly called the Intellectual Property Clause in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, and reads, "The Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive rights to their respective writings." So, listed right up there with Congress's power to lay and collect taxes and to declare war and to gather armies is the power to promote the progress of learning and knowledge through the grant of a limited monopoly to authors and inventors in the form of copyrights and patents. It is, without question, the coolest of the congressional powers. Stan, does that seem biased? Oh, I'm Stan. Mark? Does that seem biased? No? Good. The law has undergone progress of learning and knowledge through the grant has undergone several major revisions in the past 225 years, and it's currently in the process of a major review. So let's talk about what types of works are eligible for copyright protection and what rights authors or owners have in those works. Copyright law protects original works of authorship. Originality in the context of copyright means only that the work owes its origin to the author. That is, it's independently created and isn't copied from other works. How creative do these original works have to be, though? Not very, at all. For a work to be copyrightable, there only needs to be a minimal amount of creativity. Adult judges in court have described it as a scintilla, a dab, even a glimmer. So why is the bar for creativity set so low? Well, it's because lawmakers and judges probably aren't the best people to decide what types of creative works promote the progress of knowledge. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said, "It would be a dangerous undertaking for persons trained only to the law to constitute themselves judges of the worth of pictorial illustrations outside of the narrowest and most obvious limits." Holmes may have been speaking specifically about pictorial illustrations in this case, but the principle applies to any type of creative work. Anyway, Holmes clearly feels that judges don't necessarily make the best art critics. So what does Holmes mean by narrow and obvious limits? Well, words and short phrases like names, John Green, titles like The Fault in Our Stars, slogans, One Sick Love Story, fonts, coloring, mere listings of ingredients or contents, familiar symbols or designs like an 8-ball, none of this is protectable under copyright law. Are they protected by any other branch of intellectual property? Ask again later. One quick note, in order for a work to be protected by copyright, it need not in and of itself promote the progress of science. From literary novels to the most graphic pornography, it's probably protectable. The courts have concluded that it isn't a question of whether a work promotes the progress of knowledge, but that all works are granted equal protection. In this way, the law encourages people to create a diverse array of stuff, At the end of the day, it's the system that promotes the progress of science and not the individual works. Copyright law protects original works of authorship. Works of authorship fall into any of the 8 categories that are listed in the Copyright Act. Literary works are basically anything that can be embodied by letters or numbers, including novels, blogs, computer programs, websites, databases, and possibly really creative tweets. Musical works refers to the actual musical notation of a song by, say, T. Swizzy. Sound recordings are the actual music embodied in the record or the CD or an MP3, and it extends to things like audiobooks. That's what you actually hear. Dramatic works, which are basically stage productions like Wicked or Cats or Waiting for Godot, pantomimes and choreographic works, pictorial, graphic, and sculptural works, motion pictures, and even architectural works. All of these are considered to be writings. Congress has indicated that this list isn't exhaustive, and it's vague on purpose because humans are coming up with new ways to express themselves all the time. Believe it or not, this is not the apex of human creativity. So imagining the Guggenheim or a mime routine as writing can feel like a stretch. In order for any of these works to be considered bona fide writings in the constitutional sense, they must be fixed in any tangible medium of expression, be that a book, an MP3, source code, choreography, a blueprint, or whatever. The only requirement for a tangible medium of expression is that we, as humans, either on our own or by using a computer or some other device, be able to perceive it in the form of a copy or record. This brings up a widely misunderstood aspect of copyright. Copyright protection extends to the intangible material, the literary work, not the physical copy of the work. You may own the copy of the book, but you don't own the copyright. Also, copyright extends only to expression and not to ideas. If you come up with $1 million idea for the best movie ever made or the greatest novel in history, until you actually write these masterpieces and fix them in a tangible medium, copyright law doesn't protect you. And you can't copy can't copyright facts. Let's say you do some research and discover that Matthew Buchinger was born in Germany on June 3rd, 1674, without hands or legs. He was a famous artist, calligrapher, and magician. He was called the Little Man of Nuremberg and the greatest German living, and he was married 4 times, fathered at least 14 children by 8 different women. Even if you spend your entire academic career uncovering these fascinating facts, facts alone aren't copyrightable. A biography of Buchinger would qualify for copyright protection, but only the narrative expression would qualify. Subsequent biographers could use the facts you uncovered in your research, but would be prohibited from expressing those facts using your words. They'd have to make up their own. Sans-faire, or scenes that must be done, are not copyrightable either. These are well-worn storylines like a pair of star-crossed lovers from feuding families, or fables, or folklore. This sounds to me like a cliche. You can't copyright stuff like the idea of a dastardly villain tying a damsel to a folklore. This sounds to me like a cliche. You can't copyright stuff like the idea of a dastardly villain tying a damsel to a train track. Finally, works created by the federal government can't be copyrighted. That's why we can show you this, and this, and this, no charge. Thanks, federal employees. So who can get a copyright? Well, according to the 1976 Copyright Act, ownership initially goes to the author or authors of the work. One of the only limits to this rule is that the individual author has to be a human being. If the work is created by an entity other than a human, like say, a monkey or a mindless automaton or an employee, that creator is not an author. I'm kidding, okay? Employees are humans. But that does bring us very nicely to the idea of works made for hire. Let's go to the thought bubble. So, if your boss tells you to create something, then your boss or the company you both work for is considered to be the author of that something. A work made for hire can be a work prepared by an employee within the scope of his or her employment, or certain works that are specially ordered or commissioned. Many employment contracts spell out what constitutes work made for hire. If they don't, or if there's no clear employee-employer relationship, courts look at things like whether the employee used the employer's computer, created the work during normal work hours, or was directed by a supervisor during the creation process. If it seems that there was an employer-employee relationship and the employee created the work while acting within the scope of that employee's duties, it probably was a work made for hire. So in these cases, the employer is considered to be the author. The actual people who created the work have no economic rights in the work, other than the fact that they were compensated for their efforts. This video is a work for hire. Frank's script, my performance, Mark's direction, Zuleia's script supervision, Brandon's editing, Thought Cafe's animations, Jason's music, these are all components of this motion picture work, and they all belong to the company we work for. One interesting question here is what rights, if any, you may have if you support Crash Course via Patreon. Are you, as a paying supporter, functioning as our employer? Did you commission this work? Is this a work made for hire, authored by tens of thousands of supporters? If you participate in a crowdfunding scheme where subscribers vote on or suggest the direction of the creative work, are you joint authors? Magic 8 Ball? Huh, better not tell you now. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So authors have a bundle of exclusive rights in their copyrighted works. They get these rights at the moment the work is created. Authors don't have to register their works to be protected, but there are benefits to registration. For example, authors can't go to federal court to enforce their copyrights unless they've registered it. The reproduction right is, put simply, the right to copy. Under US law, reproduction relates only to copying that produces copies or phonorecords, which, as we just learned, have to be fixed, tangible, and intelligible. In a lot of ways, our modern digital world is just an intricate network of copying. Think about how this video got from me to you. I don't even know where the actual copy of this work resides. We have a master copy on a hard drive in the closet over there, but the copy you're viewing has been uploaded and copied to Google servers, and then it gets transferred and copied from server to server across the internet until it reaches you, where an intricate sequence of copying takes place in your device's processor and memory so that you can stream it and view it. So in this system where damages pile up for every instance of infringement, and statutory damages can be as much as $150,000 every time an infringing copy is made, get out the confetti cannon, because we are rich! What? Most of these temporary copies aren't fixed or tangible? Are you sure? We're not rich? Let's get an employee or a mindless automaton in here to clean up all this confetti. Hey, Roomba! Roomba is a registered trademark of the iRobot Corporation. Okay, so the adaptation right means that copyright owners have the exclusive right to create or authorize any translation, musical arrangement, dramatization, fictionalization, motion picture version, sound recording, art reproduction, abridgment, condensation, or any other form in which the work may be recast, transformed, or adapted. Under the distribution right, copyright owners have the right to distribute copies or phonorecords of the copyrighted work to the public by sale or other transfer of ownership, or by rental, lease, or lending. This seems pretty straightforward until the internet happened. In a digital world, what counts as a distribution? Things like streaming video services, torrent sharing, even the idea of licensing media from marketplaces like iTunes are fairly new, and the law has struggled to keep pace with the emerging technology. Really, all we can do is ask our trusty liquid-filled diagitator. Reply hazy. Ask again later. You know, I don't think this thing's magic at all. These answers are ambiguous and they seem to be arbitrary, and I don't think you should make your decisions based on this. But anyway, the public performance right allows copyright owners to recite, render, play, dance, or act any copyright-protected work, either directly or by means of any device or process. The Supreme Court recently ruled that Aereo, an
Alrighty,
online...
guys, last couple minutes. Okay. Yeah, I didn't see much progress today, guys. So hopefully in the afternoon, a lot of people get a lot of work done. Okay. So
Video
the most
service.
work done I saw today was in the stuff that's due next week from the people that are already caught up. People that are behind that should be working, not seeing enough work. Okay, let's go, guys. Yeah, it's 9:15. Head on out. Hopefully I will see many of you in office hours. All right, guys, have a good day.
Made an illegal public performance when it let customers view broadcast television over the internet. Aereo argued that since each of their customers were assigned an individual antenna, when they would transmit the over-the-air broadcast to each user, it was a private performance. The court disagreed. Under the public display right, copyright owners have the exclusive right to display their works. In 1995, a sixth right, digital audio transmission, was created. This is what comes into play whenever you stream music on Spotify or Pandora. Under the most recent version of the US copyright law, these exclusive rights last for the lifetime of the author plus 70 years. For works made For works made for hire, terms last for 95 years from publication or 120 years from the date of creation, whichever is shorter. So that means this video won't enter the public domain until January 1st, 2111. That is a long time. A lot of people think that's too long. Some people think that's not long enough. What do you think? Tell us in comments, and we'll see you next week. Crash Course Intellectual Property is filmed at the Chad and Stacy Imigholtz studio in Indianapolis, Indiana, and it's made by all of these nice workers for hire. If you'd like to keep Crash Course free for everyone forever, you can fund the series at Patreon, a crowdfunding platform that allows you to support the content you love. You can get awesome rewards for your support, but you do not get ownership of the Crash Course copyright. Sorry. The greatest reward, though, is helping people learn stuff. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. Hi, I'm Stan Muller. This is Crash Course Intellectual Property, and today we're continuing our discussion of copyright law. In his 2011 book, Infringement Nation, Professor John Turanian conducts a thought experiment where he tracks a guy's encounter with copyright law through the course of an unremarkable